I'm Derek Eyring. I've been in the real estate business for over 3 decades. I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and I'm always paying attention to real estate trends, industry innovators, and business influencers.
I'm Alan Smith. For over 25 years, I've helped buyers and sellers with their real estate needs. Join us on this podcast. Let's talk about strategies to help you play this real estate game to win.
Join us as we search out the latest trends, hot topics, red flags, and deal breakers in every episode of Market Movers. Oh, we're going.
How about that?
Wow, that was quick.
Another day in the life of a real estate person.
Wow. So we are here, and just so you know, we're in a working office here at John L. Scott Tacoma North, north end of Tacoma. And so if you hear a little ambient noise, there's actually people doing their jobs around us.
Taking care of business. Yep.
There's maybe a couple traffic jams out here. You never know.
Never know.
So today is a special edition.
How special is it?
It's so special that we've kept it under wraps.
Yes.
For the last month. Top secret.
Top secret.
So we call this in our meetings a red flag deal breaker, right?
Yeah.
So
these are things that really have happened in the last, couple of weeks. We've been collecting them. In fact, there's a lot of them here. So we actually have a list today that we're working off of, so we don't forget any of them. But yeah, these are things that really do happen from time to time in real estate transactions that can affect a buyer, a seller. A lot of these are going to be broker centric.
Right.
So if you're a real estate broker right now, you might want to listen up just a little bit harder because these are great lessons to help avoid stubbing your toe.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is a part of our normal weekly meetings where we talk about, things transactionally that just happened that might be good lessons. And like you were saying, these are mostly broker related, but also they affect buyers and sellers.
Absolutely.
So, listen up for everybody. Right. So, I was thinking about this too. We get these from both talking to our brokers, dealing with phone calls and transactional issues, and also from reviewing files. So
Right.
I don't think everybody knows how that works as a real estate designated broker. You see lots of terms like managing broker. Al, can a managing broker be in an office and not have any responsibilities as far as reviewing files?
Yeah, they really can. If you have your designated broker license and you decide to affiliate with an office somewhere, but you don't want to be part of the office management team, you can still do that. That's no problem, but the state requires you identify yourself as a managing broker.
Okay.
So a managing broker has a higher level of responsibility, but they may not actually have any management functions in an office. And so it's a little bit confusing,
A little
I think,
confusing,
to the
I think,
public.
yeah.
I don't know what a designated broker is. I don't know what designated means, other than that's the person
It's the person who does have to review
Yeah.
the file. So it's a managing broker who has been elevated to that position and taking that responsibility. So we have to look at all the files that come in. The files have to be turned in a timely manner.
Yep.
And then we have to review them in a timely manner. And we get audited, and it's random, like every couple of years per office.
Sure.
Somebody comes in, and nowadays they don't come in because our file system is different. And I was thinking about that the other day. We used to compile a paper file of every document in the transaction. And
Every
we'd
single
have
one.
to keep that on site for 5 years.
Yeah. And it was, and so now we do it digitally, and so
Right.
it's a lot easier from that standpoint. But I think one of the other advantages we have in the offices, in the 3 offices, we have close to 100 real
Ish,
estate brokers,
yeah.
and we're auditing all of those files. So when somebody says, "Well, how's the market doing?" It's very easy for a real estate broker to just kind of think immediately of how their business is doing.
Right.
So if I'm slow, I say, it's kind of
Yeah.
slow right now.
Yeah.
But if I'm burning myself out because I'm so busy, I say, oh, geez, I'm just so frantic, right? I think we have a little different perspective because we're looking at what's going on with multiple people, different offices, different parts of town. And so I think we get a much better read. So when we get these red flag and deal breakers, they're fairly significant because it's something that's come up either once or twice, or something that's just reared its ugly head. And
Right.
so it's a piece of good advice just to kind of know about them. So
Yeah. Now I'm going to throw an audible out there because
Okay.
this just came up today in our conversation at our meeting in the Tacoma North office. And that is so the question would be, or the general kind of lay of the land would be, you have a deal. So your buyer and seller are in transaction. And right before closing is generally when the buyer gets their insurance binder.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully, this will be a lesson for everybody to do that much sooner than right before closing, because what's happening in the insurance industry right now?
So there's a lot of upheaval in the insurance industry right now, especially in the state of California because of wildfire issues. And so there are a lot of companies that are checking themselves at the gate and saying, okay, we're going to change the way we do business. So, for example, in the last few weeks, some things have come out. Allstate, for example, in the state of California, just got an approval to raise their premiums by 34%. There's another company, let me check my notes here real quick. It is State Farm has announced they are not going to renew over 30,000 policies in the state of California, most of these homeowner policies. And so, again, they're trying to mitigate their risks, right? There's a national stat that I don't know if everybody's heard or not, but last year, of all the transactions that fell through in escrow when they were in escrow, 7% of those were due to unforeseen homeowners insurance rates.
And that's a barn burner of a number.
That's a
Right.
bad message to get when you're like maybe one day away from closing, and all of a sudden you get your notice of what your premium is going to be. So,
Yeah.
if you are a real estate broker, or if you, or more importantly, are a buyer of real estate right now, maybe you don't have homeowners insurance, especially if you're a first-time home buyer, you've never had to deal with this before. Get out in front of this issue. Get a hold of a good, competent person. If you don't know who to talk to, start with your lender. Your lender probably knows good contacts in the area that write homeowners insurance policies. Get the details on what your premium is going to be, how much that's going to affect your monthly payment, because that could be a deal breaker, and you don't want that to happen at the last minute when the U-Hauls are loaded. You want to find that out up front so you can adjust accordingly.
Yeah, and so buyers, if you have a broker and they're telling you things like, "We got to get on your insurance right away," that's a good broker, right? Because
Right.
they're getting out ahead of it, and they know that that's a possible barrier to get you from the finish line. So we want to
Yeah.
make sure that we cover that as quickly as possible, right?
Yeah, and the other specific, if you are a member of the Northwest Multiple Listing Service, the homeowners insurance protection, there used to be a couple paragraphs dedicated to that on the financing addendum, but that was a
Right.
long time ago. That has since been removed. And so, while they may be protected if their financing falls through because of homeowners insurance, there's another form. It's Form 22VV, as in vampire. That's how I remember these things. That form specifically states, hey, we need to protect our buyer. We need to make sure these certain things happen. So if you're a member of the multiple, check out that form. Don't just assume that it's all going to be roses. Get out in front of that, because I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that.
Yeah, and in a nutshell, what that form says is it's a protection for the buyer. It says, hey, we have to get insurance. And if the insurance policy is more than 0.5% of the total purchase price, we have a way out. We
Right.
can get out of the deal.
Yeah. There will be-
Otherwise, you don't have a way out based on insurance, except for your financing fails because your
Right.
insurance is too much.
Yeah, so just be on the safe side. There's an old saying, inspect what you expect. You expect it to close smoothly. Start inspecting these other issues to make sure that you don't get a curveball at the last minute.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to get on to our red flag deal breakers. We're just going to go down a list. Some of these are classics that we always talk about. Some of these are fairly new. Here's one that just happened. You represent the buyer. So you're an agent, you represent the buyer.
Okay.
And their lender requires them to sign off on paperwork verifying that all work was completed. So they had some work order items
Like on a home inspection?
on a
So,
home
yep.
inspection in order to get the CD out. What's a CD, Al?
So that's a closing disclosure statement that the lenders are required to send to the buyer. When the buyers receive those, the buyers have a 3-day rescission right built within that form to prevent what used to be called predatory lending, where they were told a set of numbers when they first made their application. Now they get the preview of what the real numbers look like, and they're completely different.
Oh, that happened a few times
Few
back way
times
back when.
back in the desert days. So it's designed to protect the consumer from getting bad information.
Okay, and here's the hitch in this example: the work wasn't done.
Yeah.
So you represent the buyer. The lender's saying, "Hey, we need something from you that says that the work's done, but it wasn't done."
So there's three other components to this too. A lender will sometimes say, this is a condition of docs.
Right.
This is a condition of closing. So in other words, we're going to make this a condition. You cannot close you can sign and everything, but you cannot close the transaction until this is and verified that this is done. So that's a condition of funding. A condition of docs means we're not even going to cut the docs until this is done. In this particular case, we have a lender that's saying we're not even going to send the CD out, which is before the docs are sent to escrow. We're not even going to send the CD out till we know that this is done. So different lenders have different requirements. And in this case, sometimes the work isn't going to be done until just before closing.
Right.
And so that's kind of what we ran into in this case.
Right. And I think, the question would be whether or not that lender would change,
Right.
to make that a condition to fund
To condition
rather
of
than
funding.
condition
Yeah.
of docs, which then wouldn't slow down cause you to have a longer closing date.
Otherwise, you're going to need extensions on everything. So
Exactly.
yeah, so that came up.
Exactly. We have dogs barking in the background.
That's
so-
okay. That's our designated broker.
We have an
by the
office
way.
office pound going on here right now.
Yes, that's okay.
So anyway,
Okay. So here's another scenario for you. You represent the buyer,
okay.
and the transaction just closed, and you go to the property and you discover there are still the seller's personal items remaining behind.
Stuff that they want, like gold bars and stuff like that.
Usually not a gold bar,
Oh.
but usually presents nonetheless.
Right.
And so what do you do in that situation? The transaction's already closed. The sellers put their hat on their head and off to Poughkeepsie they are. So-
Yeah, that's a tough one, and that's one of the number one issues that we have is post-closing items left behind, and there are some ways that we can sort of mitigate that, right, Alan?
There are. So if you're in the Northwest Multiple, Form 22D has a provision on it that says what happens to personal items that are left behind after closing. Are they still owned by the seller, or do they become owned by the buyer? But leaving that issue aside, usually what we find has happened is the buyer has failed to exercise their right to conduct a final walkthrough. It's sometimes before signing.
Right.
Our multiple allows that to take place within 5 days of closing. So if you do your walkthrough and you notice that there's a lot of personal items still there, sometimes your spidey sense starts tingling a little bit, and you should honor that.
Yeah, for sure.
Farmer Brown, who has the old shop and he has 37 years of nuts and bolts that he's collected out there, that's going to be a different kind of move than somebody who's a minimalist. So be aware of that. The leverage the buyer has is to not sign, or to hold up closing in some way as leverage. But after the transaction has closed, from a legal standpoint, there's not a whole lot you can do except rant and rave and plead and hope that sellers will come make it right. But
yeah, you don't have any leverage after closing. So
Yeah.
if you have a good broker, first of all, you're doing a walkthrough. And that broker has telegraphed that to the listing broker, right?
Yep.
Hey, we're going to be doing our walkthrough. Just want to remind you so that it's not a surprise to the seller,
yes,
right? Because the seller doesn't know unless that listing broker tells them that it built into your paperwork. There's a right to walk through to make sure that the house is in the same condition as it was when they viewed it originally. That's basically what it says.
that's the concept. And
And
to your point there, I have had a situation where we went to do our walkthrough. I represented the buyer. The listing broker never informed the seller that we were going to do that, or that was built into the paperwork. So the seller looked at this as us questioning their honesty.
Yeah.
In this case, we had a sump pump put in the crawl space, and we needed to just come out and visually inspect to see, okay, did that happen?
Right.
And is the electrical work done correctly? Well, they took it as a personal affront that we were questioning their honesty. And that was a breakdown in communications, not from our part, but from the listing broker not telling the seller, hey, they're entitled to do this. They probably will do this. So let me know when it's done and we'll get them out here so they're all good with it. So
Yeah, yeah.
most of these things, I think you'll find at the end of the day, most of these things are alleviated by better communication.
I think you're right about that. 90% of these items are just about having lots of conversations. And because I think we get, as brokers, we get kind of caught up in the process.
Mm-hmm.
I think we might sometimes automatically assume that everyone else knows
Sure.
what the process is. We forget
Yeah.
that this is like sometimes one time for folks, right? That's the one thing, the one time they buy or sell a house.
And there's a saying too that sometimes when expectations aren't met, 100% of the time, it's usually based on poor communication.
Yeah.
Something didn't get communicated correctly. And so, as a broker, make sure you're doing everything you can to tell your clients what the next steps are likely going to be and keep them in the loop. You don't have to overwhelm them with the 27 steps, but
Right.
just let them know what the next few are so there aren't any hidden surprises.
Okay, so let's get on to the next one. You were contacted by a seller who wants to fire their broker and hire you.
Mm. Well,
What do we do in that situation? This is not only for brokers, but if you're not happy with your agent
right. So,
as a seller, what do you do?
So if the client is reaching out to me out of the blue, they call me and they say, "Hey, heard great things about you. We're not real happy with our real estate broker right now. Can you come talk to us about selling our house?" Let's say. Yes, I can come talk to them about selling their house as long as they're reaching out to me and I'm not intentionally looking for that business. I'm not
So you're not
poaching.
soliciting
I'm
it.
not soliciting a
Yeah.
listing. I'm not trying to poach somebody else's client. But what I should not do is I should not throw the other agent under the bus. I should not do anything to disparage the other real estate broker because I don't know both sides of this story. And most
Right.
importantly, I'm not able to help them get out of that contract. Okay, that's not any function that I can perform. If they want to get out of their contract with their real estate broker, then they need to talk to their broker, and they need to talk to that broker's designated broker. And beyond that, here's how I market homes. Here's what I like to do. These are the 17 things I do every single time. If you want to go with me, I'd be happy to do this for you. And so that's a conversation you can have as long as they reached out to you, but it's not about throwing the other person under the bus, and it's certainly not about saying, okay, now you need to do these 3 things to get out of that contract. That's way above us. That's not what we're here to do. So here's what I do to sell houses. If you want to get out of your relationship that you have now, you got to talk to those folks, and then let me know what you decide to do.
Right. Makes sense. And it's a message to sellers, though, as well. And that is, interview your brokers and ask them for a marketing plan and make sure they stick to the marketing plan that they committed to when they first talked to you and you decided, hey, I'm going to hitch my wagon to this broker for 6 months or 3 months or whatever the case may be and sell my number one asset, generally speaking. I want to make sure that their marketing plan is executed, right?
Right.
So that's just hold their feet to the fire, right?
A great example of that. Years ago, I had somebody walk in. They had just fired their real estate broker because their house hadn't sold in 6 months. And I happened to be at the office. They walked in on a Saturday morning and said, "Will you come help us sell our house?" So I pulled up their listing. Now, this was in April. I pulled up their listing. They had hit the market the first week of November originally. And the photo that was representing their property was when the front of their house was decorated for Halloween.
Oh, nice.
So they had big
Festive.
cobwebs in the apple tree, and they had all of these little headstones in their front lawn. Now, if you zoomed in on the photo, you would see that they said Frankenstein, Dracula, the Mummy. But in April, nobody's thinking, wow, nice
So-
Halloween decorations. They're thinking, this house is in a cemetery.
Right.
I don't want to live here. So it's little obvious things like that too that can kind of stand out when you go look at another listing. But you cannot help them get out of that contract.
Right.
So
Okay. I think
let me ask you another one that came up. You represent the buyer.
Okay.
Now, this is a Pierce County specific issue. Pierce County has an additional step whenever you do septic inspections. They call it the
Ah,
RSS. It's
for
through
our
the
rural friends.
Yes, yes. Uh,
Yeah.
it's the RSS stands for the Report of System Status. It is a report that's generated by the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. So basically, what happens is this: there's a listing that's on septic. So you have a septic company come out and inspect and pump the tank, and that's called the O&M, the Operation and Maintenance Report. When that looks good, and the septic company says, "Yep, we're all good," they file that report with the county. Pierce County then follows up and sends out an inspector to visually inspect that this has been done and that there's no signs of standing sewage on the lawn or anything like that.
And that's about it, right? That's all
That's
they can
about it.
really do is kind of go by the property, make sure there's not a giant puddle of
Yes.
stuff.
But the important thing is they do actually do these inspections. The challenge is they are oftentimes weeks out from this inspection. So if you have a seller that has put off doing the septic because of the expense, and now they do it when the buyer shows up, if you have a 30-day close and it took a week or two for the septic company to do the O&M phase,
Right.
then they ordered the report of system status from Pierce County. Well, guess what? If Pierce County's 4 weeks out, you're not making your closing deadline. So here's the
Absolutely.
question. If the RSS has not been issued by Tacoma Pierce County's health department and the closing date arrives, does the buyer have a way out of the transaction? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think they have a way out, whether or not they want out. A lot of times, what we're seeing is escrow is willing to close that as long as everyone signs a hold harmless. I do not recommend this.
Right.
You just don't know. I mean, obviously, the outfit, whoever the contractor was that pumped and inspected the tank and the system, already blessed it,
Right.
theoretically,
Right.
right? They didn't say there's a lot of problems here. We're going to submit the RSS. You would have known, right?
Right.
So if they've already blessed it, theoretically everything should be fine, right? The
Right.
county will come out, but you never know, right?
You never know. And when you think about all of the expenses in a transaction regarding a house sale, very few things are as expensive as a
Yeah.
septic failure. Now, again, you probably would have caught that when the company came out to do the O&M, but Pierce County has the final say in all this. And so it's a huge risk if you're going to close without that. And,
Right.
the buyer does have an option to get out because the septic addendum, if they've used the specific Pierce County addendum, says that it's there, that they're
Right.
they're agreeing to have that provided. So
Yeah, and on a side note, buyers, if you're looking at a house with a septic system, have that septic system pressure tested as well,
Yeah.
right? It's an extra step, but it'll also kind of further test the limits and the capacity of that system and make sure that it's good. Because otherwise, it's just checking the tank, the baffles, make sure everything's good. You don't know whether or not the drain field
the
is.
drain field is the other component of that,
Yeah.
and you just don't know. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Here's one that happens every once in a while. Seller's first deal fell out over inspection items. Seller wants to go back on the market at a higher price.
Okay. So we talked earlier about poor communication, right?
Okay.
So if the transaction fell through because of inspection issues, what we probably had was the buyer asked for a few things to be done. The seller did not agree, obviously. They may have tried to get a few of them done, but either way, the buyer exercised their right to exit the transaction. And now the seller is going to put the house back on the market. Putting the house back on the market at a higher price makes less sense than putting it on at a higher price when you first listed it. It doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like now you have to explain to all the other real estate brokers, well, why did the house go back on the market when it came out of an inspection phase? But now you're also been on the market a lot longer, right? So
Right.
if you have a loaf of day-old bread sitting on the shelf and nobody's buying it, you don't raise the price. You have to do whatever you need to do to get that bread sold. So,
Yeah.
so it may be bad information Sometimes it's people that watch cable TV shows that were filmed in Mississippi back in 2002, and they think, aha, we can raise the price now because we painted the closet and we emptied the litter box. That's not true. That's not true in this market these days.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. So, if you want to try it, raise the price 10 grand, see what happens. I guarantee you'll be right back down to where you need to be anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another along the inspection lines. Your seller wants to reject the buyer's inspection requests.
Okay.
The seller only got one offer, full price, cash, and the inspections are less than $1,000 in total costs. And in your opinion, you look at these and you think these are reasonable. Okay. So full price, quick deal. Yeah. It was their first offer and only offer, less than $1,000, and the seller digs in and says, no.
And I guess the best way to talk about this is to tell a little story. I was purchasing a property, a fourplex, during the recession. And
good timing.
Good timing, turns out.
Turns out, yep.
But didn't know that then. As a matter of fact, I'm getting towards closing, and I told the person that was loaning me the money to buy this, I don't think I'm going to do this. I just don't think I see enough. I don't see light at the end of this tunnel, and I'm nervous that I'm going to be, buying a property that's a liability. And he told me something I'll never forget. If you don't do this, if you don't follow through with this, you're going to regret this forever. And he was absolutely right. But it took somebody strong enough and firm enough to tell me, you need to do this. This is in your best interest. And this is the time that a really good broker who can communicate, can talk to their client and say, hey, I'm not trying to just ram a square peg through a round hole here. I'm telling you this because it's in your best interest. I just had this happen. And my wife heard the phone call. I literally had to mentally wrestle with my client, right?
Right.
to talk to my client about what was in their best interest, despite the fact that they really didn't want to do it.
Right.
Turns out they did it, and about 2 days later, they thanked me for it.
Yeah.
Thanked me for walking me through this. And I would have shot myself in the foot if I would have gone by my emotions.
Right.
Because at that point, it's emotional, right?
Sure.
You're just upset that you have to deal with this.
Right.
Right? So there are times when you need somebody in your corner that doesn't necessarily tell you what you want to hear, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. And part of what we're being paid for as real estate brokers is to be honest and candid with our clients. You don't need special dialogue in this business. Honesty is the best dialogue. And so you just have to sometimes get some perspective on the transaction. Sometimes it's the heat of the moment. They criticize the wallpaper in the kitchen, and the seller spent 3 months picking out that wallpaper, and so so they're emotionally wrapped up in the transaction. The other thing we forget about as real estate brokers is the closer you get to closing, the more everybody's on an emotional roller coaster, both on the buying side and the selling side, and the smallest little things can set people off. And so you need to be aware of that, be conscious of it, honor that, and sometimes, just give them some perspective. What does it look like if we don't do this? If we do this, here's what it looks like too. So
right, absolutely.
So here's another example. Seller is upset at the buyer. And by the way, on a side note, sellers and buyers rarely meet. So if the seller and the buyer are at odds with each other during a transaction and they've never met, the best indication of how this happened is it started with the real estate brokers.
Yeah.
One broker said to their client, well, I can't believe this other broker. Oh, I can't believe they're asking. Oh, I would never have asked for this, but they're asking for it.
Yeah, and it's a big problem, really, I think.
It's the mother and father hen syndrome where, I would never let you buy that house. Well, that's not your decision to make. They want to live in this house. Help them get it, right? So we got a situation recently where the seller was upset at the buyer for some reason. Don't even remember what it is. But they went around the neighborhood and started bad-mouthing their buyers.
Before closing, right?
Before closing.
So they're like, get ready for your new neighbor.
Yeah, get ready for these whatevers, right?
Yeah.
And so the takeaway on that is what? It's kind of obvious when we're sitting here talking about it, but
It's the unintended consequences of all of our actions. We've all dealt with that in our lives, right? So you don't think about these sorts of things when you're talking to your neighbor saying, well, I'm having a bad experience in my transaction and I'm going to blame it on this buyer. But down the road, if something comes up, you want good communication between buyer and seller, and it doesn't start out on the right foot. If the new buyer who moves into their house and they're so happy, then gets a visit from one of the neighbors, and the neighbor's like, oh, geez, Sally was acting like you were just a terrible person, but
Yeah.
you seem so nice.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you're not so happy about
Wait a minute.
Sally.
Yeah, somebody's been saying something about me. So,
And then
yeah.
the furnace breaks. And now Sally is really on your list,
Right,
right?
right.
So it's better for all parties if we all kind of have positive conversations around each other.
And at the end of the day, you want smooth transactions. You want everybody to accomplish what they want to accomplish. The seller wants to sell their house. The buyer wants to buy the house. Help them do that in the easiest way possible, so everybody comes out smelling great and feeling great at the end of the day. And that way you get referrals down the road. People say, oh, you got to call these folks. They're wonderful.
Yeah, and I think what happens is it's easy to defer, right? So it's an emotional experience, right? So let's say, for example, you represent a seller and the buyer does their inspection and they come up with a whole bunch of things that are kind of superfluous or a little bit, over the top. Rather than me going to my seller, boy, this is really over the top. This is ridiculous. I don't know what they're thinking. What kind of agent do they have? I don't know what's going on with them. We got to do, rather than doing that, let's just deal with the facts
Right.
and not try to be demonstrative towards
Yeah,
the other.
even if, and again, this is specifically for real estate brokers, but even if you're dealing with Attila the Hun on the other side of the transaction, that's not necessarily something that you need to share with your client. It's okay if they know the extra work that you're going through just to process things, but you don't need to break bad on everybody else on the other side of the transaction, because then your client is forced to assume that's true and take on that same attitude towards the buyer. And that doesn't help anybody at the end of the day. So get along with everybody, be nice, be polite. You can be firm, you can be professional, you can watch out for your client. Absolutely, that's your role. But do everything you can to get along with everybody. It just makes for a better transaction.
Right, and if you have a broker that's tied in to the local market and tied in to local brokers and have good relationships, all the better, because you can get a lot of things done just, by having a broker who is a good communicator and effective in their marketplace, right? So that's important. That's when being local becomes very important.
Yeah, sometimes people get so caught up, they just need to win. I need to win this argument with the other broker. They don't stop to think, what does this look like after 20 of these sessions during this next month, right? I guarantee you, if the sellers and the buyers are at odds with each other, well, let me ask you this. What do you think the house looks like the day the buyer moves in? Was it cleaned? Is it spotless? Is the windows washed? Is everything all dialed in? If the buyers and sellers have been at each other's throats for the entire transaction, that's when you're going to find 27 bags of garbage thrown up above the crawl space in the garage.
Okay, so here's the next one, and
Right.
this just happened a couple months ago. You represent the seller and your contingent buyer, so you're in contract.
Okay.
You represent the seller, another agent brought the buyer,
Okay?
but they have to sell their home first.
Okay, gotcha,
Okay, so
gotcha.
you're in a contingent contract to buy that house. They've sent you a notice, though, that they are satisfied with their contingency.
So they did what they said they were going to do. They
Normally
sold their house.
Great news, right?
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Perfect.
The only problem is, upon closer look, the seller's buyer accepted a deal with a 20-day close.
Ooh. Okay.
Okay, so
So now this might, again, be specific to the Northwest MLS paperwork, but on contingent sales, there's a lot of moving parts here. So once again, to set the stage, you're the seller.
Yeah.
I want to buy your house, but I need to sell my house first.
Right.
And so we agree to do that. And at some point down the road, I do sell my house to my buyer. So that's going to be, let's just call that buyer Fred. Okay,
Right.
I sell the house to Fred, but I scheduled the closing with Fred for 20 days. Okay.
because Fred's hot to trot.
Yep.
He's got all cash. He doesn't.
And I'm thinking, boy, Derek will be happy with this
Right.
because I've sold my house. Look at this.
Yeah.
Right. Well, our paperwork has very specific guidelines for things that I can do as the seller to Fred. And there's a couple circumstances, if they exist, I have to get Derek's permission first. The first one is if I sell my house to Fred, and Fred is also a contingent buyer. I have to get Derek's approval for that, because what we're really starting to do now is stack railway cars onto the train.
Right.
And pretty soon the caboose is what's going to determine everything that closes. And poor Derek sitting up here in the engine compartment is like, well,
Biting my nails.
I don't even know who these people are, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the conditions. I can't sell my house to a contingent buyer without Derek's written approval. The second is that I can't sell my house to Fred if it's less than 30 or more than 45 days in closing.
And why would that be, Al?
Well,
Generally speaking?
because the idea is that once I sell my house to Fred, I'm going to want to close with you. So I can't
Right.
spring something on you like, hey, we're closing in 3 weeks, get
Right.
ready.
Yeah.
And I can't draw it out so far because you're like, well, wait a minute, I got plans.
Yeah.
Now you're 60 days out. What is that?
Yeah.
So the rule is 30 to 45 days. If you're in that sweet spot, when I sell my house to Fred, you're good.
Okay.
You don't have to get Derek's written permission. But if it's less than 30 or more than 45, I need Derek's written permission to let me enter into that agreement, because it's affecting his closing and his moving abilities, right?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Last year, in 2003, the language changed in this paragraph. The language talks about what happens if I do that anyway. Either I didn't know or I didn't get out my calendar and count those days.
Right.
We could be talking about day 29 or we could be talking about day 46.
One day.
You're
or-
outside
yeah.
the envelope,
Yeah.
right? The new language as of last year states that if Derek chooses to, he has 3 days in which he can rescind the agreement. He can terminate this agreement.
So you come to me and say, okay, I accepted a deal. It's 20 days. You got to pack up and move in 20 days.
Yep. You can choose whether you
Yeah.
like that idea or not. That might work
Yeah.
out perfect for you, but you have the right to terminate the transaction because I didn't follow the rules.
Right.
And here's the big change.
Here's the
When
kicker.
Derek terminates this transaction based on this circumstance, I, as the buyer, am now in default, and the default provision in the contract applies, which means my earnest money is now in jeopardy. So because I thought, I might have been
Yeah.
thinking I'm doing the right thing here, but because I didn't follow those rules, I could also be out of a contract now with Derek if he terminates everything. And if I put $5, $10, $15, $20,000 down in earnest money, off the door that goes.
So we just had one just like that. So we represented the seller, and there was a better offer came in that was on the table, and then all of a sudden this rears its
Yeah.
head, right?
Yep.
And so what's the seller thinking?
So
there's
in that-
$20,000 in earnest money.
So in that circumstance, if you're still the seller, you're thinking, well, gosh, if I kick Alan to the curb, this other offer's better anyway. I would rather take the other offer anyway. But now, on top of that, I get another 20 grand kicker
Yeah.
because of the earnest money. So
Tough one. Luckily, our seller was a good, look, you can go both ways with this. Business is business, right? The paperwork's the paperwork. Your agent on the other side wasn't paying attention. That's why you got to get an agent that's paying attention,
yeah.
right? So you can look at it that way, and you can look at it the other way too, right? The seller decided to be a good person and go ahead and move forward, right? They had to modify a few things, but they moved forward, and they didn't put these guys out, take their earnest money, and move on to the better deal. So there's hope in this world that it's not all about just money.
True. At the same time, it would be wrong to assume that's going to happen every single time.
Yeah.
So the takeaway from this is pay attention to what your paperwork says. If you're the real estate broker, that's your responsibility. It's not the buyer's responsibility to know automatically what all these provisions say. That's why they hired us.
Right.
So know what your paperwork says, and if you don't know what the paperwork says, sit down and learn.
But you can really get sideways, and you can get
Especially
your
on
clients
contingent
sideways
sales.
on those
There are
really
a lot
quick.
of moving parts there.
So this is another reason that, if you don't have somebody that doesn't know the paperwork, or if you just want to kind of try to do something yourself, you can get yourself into a heap full of trouble.
Big problems, yeah. And so let me, we've talked a lot about inspection stuff, and we've talked a little bit about contingent buyers. Here's something else that came up just recently. You're out there and you meet a buyer,
Okay.
and the buyer wants you to help them buy a house. Buyer's refusing to sign a buyer representation agreement.
Well, things have changed, right?
I worked with somebody last year. They never asked me to sign this, but why do I have to sign a contract with you? I don't even know you.
Right.
You know?
Or it very well may be that that buyer worked with somebody last week that didn't ask them to sign anything.
Yes, there is that possibility, unfortunately.
Yeah. So what has changed, Alan? Things have changed.
Well, the
right?
law changed, and
Oh.
so yeah.
Okay.
So the law changed, and in the state of Washington, if that's where you're watching this now, every relationship that you have with a buyer, if you're out conducting real estate services, you need a buyer representation agreement signed and in place before you show them the first house. And that's just the way the law works. So yes, we can complain about it. I've never had to do this. I don't believe in doing this. I wouldn't sign one of these as a customer. It doesn't matter. It's what the law says. So if you have a buyer that refuses to do so, then what do you say?
Well, I'm sorry. We can't. I mean, the law tells me that I can't move forward with you
Exactly.
unless we have this signed, okay?
Yep.
And there is a provision that allows me to show you houses, and I'm not exclusive to you. So you don't have any obligation to me
Right.
going down the road. You can go use whoever you want. So worst case scenario, you sign a non-exclusive agreement.
You still have to have the written agreement in place, but
Yes.
one of the provisions is, are you exclusive or non-exclusive?
How do you feel about that, Al? Just let's throw that out there, because I have a certain feeling about that as far as being exclusive or non-exclusive.
Well, so I'll give the plus to the exclusive side, and then you can give the plus to maybe the non-exclusive. The plus to the exclusive side is, look, I'm out working, I'm helping you. I don't want to feel like you're, just going to turn around and go grab the next agent that's available when you call me and get my voicemail. I want to feel like if I'm exclusively helping you find your house, that you're exclusively going to want to work with me.
Right, that makes sense.
But then on the other side, you got the non-exclusive provision.
The other side was, and we've always sort of worked by this, you and I at least, and you get a free spin on the merry-go-round, right?
Right.
So in other words, if I just meet you and we just hit it off, and we meet at an open house or something, I'm more than happy to work with you and see what happens. And if you like the way I work and we work well together, then we keep moving. And there was nothing in writing prior to this that obligated you to me or me to you. And so I still kind of operate that way. I feel like if you don't like what I'm providing, then you need to go find somebody that is doing a good job for you and that you feel is a better fit.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm totally fine with non-exclusive. However, I totally see the other side.
Sure. There are two different sides, two different ways that somebody might want to run their business. The bottom line is, though, regardless of which path you take, you have to have a written agreement before you show them the first house. The only exception to that is if you're hosting an open house, somebody walks in and they're looking around, and yes, you can talk to them about that house, you can show them the house, you can show them the hidden trap door underneath the staircase and all that good stuff. That's the exception to the rule, but when it goes beyond that, if they say, oh, I'd like to go see the little yellow house down at the end of the street, now you need a buyer representation agreement. And there's a great form if you're in the Northwest Multiple. It's in the pamphlet section along with the law of real estate agency, which is a great thing to have at your open houses so people know there's some meat behind what you're saying. You're not just trying to say things. It's pamphlet P7 is a one-page, it's a notice to home buyers that just kind of gives them a heads up, hey, our law changed as of January 1st. So here we are 9.5 months at the time we're recording this, and people are still struggling with this. So just get over it. It's what it's it's like, hey, they don't make cars with manual transmissions anymore. Okay, get over it. That's just the way it is.
Hey, it's an anti-theft if you have one of those.
Nobody
knows how to drive off with it, so
absolutely.
That might be the way to go. Hey, this is sort of a question and just a general kind of topic. You've been in a transaction with a buyer, so you've gotten them into a property, and they're mutual, and the rates are going down.
Ooh.
And they ask you, hey, should we lock?
So
we're a real estate broker,
yeah,
right?
so we're professionals. And the best thing we can do as a professional is tell them, talk to the expert in the financing world. I am not a lender. I don't know what rate you're getting because I don't know your credit score and I don't know your job. I don't know all the things.
You mean the lender doesn't call you up and say, Bob and Sally have 750 credit score, they owe on 3 cars, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, see, that's a good example of things that I just don't need to know to do my business.
We don't get that.
I
We
have
don't wanna
trusted people in the lending world that I like to refer to folks so that they can pick from somebody that I know is good, right? And if they go with one of those people, I trust what they're doing, right?
Right.
And so the first thing that I'm going to say is if they say that, say, that's a great point. Have you talked to so-and-so about this? Have they run your numbers recently? What are they saying? Because they're more on top of it. And the last thing I want to do is muddy up the waters by giving my clients bad advice. Because I might give them bad advice about something I know nothing about.
Right. We don't really, that's not our world.
That'd be like if
Right.
they asked me what I thought of the trusses.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
they look like they're made out of wood. That's about,
Yeah.
it's not my job to tell them if the trusses are in good shape. I would never want to do that because I might be wrong. So,
Speaking of which, here's the next example.
Oh, goody.
We just
Okay.
had this happen.
okay.
Buyer has elected to move forward despite an extensive list of critical items on their inspection report.
Okay. So a lot of things came up on the home inspection. They want to move forward anyway.
Yeah.
I think the important thing here is, well, let's just assume they're not asking the seller to fix anything, or there's no arguments over that kind of
Correct.
stuff. As long as the buyers understand what they're buying, what I've learned over the years is that different people have different comfort levels
Yeah.
for swinging a hammer.
Yeah.
And some people are looking for that opportunity because, they want to create their own oasis here out of this house. Other people are not looking for projects. And so that would be the buyer that probably is going to walk away from this. But anybody that knows what they're getting, there's so many unspoken things about this scenario. Is this a hot smoking deal?
Right,
Is this house
yeah.
underpriced?
Yeah.
Can they put a few $1,000s more into it to maximize their equity position? The key is, though, as long as they know, this is a great example of where agents would say, you shouldn't buy this house. That's based
Right.
on my own comfort factor, right?
Yeah.
That's me
Yeah.
telling you what to do.
And I've had some of those moments.
Yeah, I
with
wouldn't wear
my
that jacket,
buyers.
Derek. I wouldn't wear that jacket.
Oh, let's
right?
talk about the ducks.
Yeah, yeah, bad example.
Yeah.
But that's not our job. Our job
Right.
is to make sure they understand what the path looks like going forward. And when they say, I want to get off the path, okay, we help them do that. And when they say, I want to keep going on the path, okay, we help them do it.
Right.
I'm not going to live there in that house.
Yeah.
As long as they know what they're walking into.
It's like your avocado wallpaper story. You got to tell your avocado wallpaper story.
So one of the first homes I sold to some people that I knew. We walked in the dining room, and it was avocado gold was the old or harvest gold, and avocado green were the old 1970s colors. And this was like brown velour wallpaper in the dining room with avocado shaded glass in the overheading chandelier, and little gold pinstripes.
Oh, yeah,
on
I
the
remember
wall
that.
and stuff. And
I think my mom had that in her
and
house.
I probably did too, but this is not in the 70s anymore. This is like
Yeah.
1998,
Yeah.
right? And so we come around the corner and boom, this thing just hit me. And I knew these people, so I was probably being a little snarkier than I
Yeah.
probably should be. And I said, wow, check out that wallpaper. And just before I was about ready to drop the insult bombs, she looked at her husband and she said, oh, I know, I just love it. And I kind of looked out of sight of my eye, like, what? And she goes,
Yeah.
you know, it reminds me of Aunt Ruth's house. And they started talking about Aunt Ruth and the way her kitchen was. And I realized at that moment, you know what? Thank goodness I didn't say anything, because by saying something that they loved, that I thought was ugly, what I'm really doing is diminishing them, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden, I'm not like them anymore. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, he doesn't understand us. He doesn't understand what we're about, right?
Right.
So when it's cosmetic stuff, I try to keep my opinion to myself, because, gosh, I hate that paint color. Do you think that could be fixed? Sure. Let's
Yeah.
what would it look like if we
Exactly.
painted the wall like an off-white or neutral gray or something?
Right.
So I try not to give them my opinions from that moment. I
Yeah.
learned a valuable lesson that they bought that house.
Right.
And a year later, they invited me over, and you came over for a barbecue. That wallpaper was still there in that dining room, and it would have been the first thing I would have torn out. So,
Right.
you know,
everyone's different, right?
everybody's different.
Yeah. Okay. Now we have our final. I think we'll cut it off here because we're
Okay.
about an hour in.
All right.
Here's our final one, and this happens quite a bit. Too much, as a matter of fact. So your buyer is a few days away from closing, and they want to go buy their new furniture at, we're going to just use the example, at the Cannery.
Oh, sure.
Everyone shops
Yeah.
there. It's a great
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
If you haven't been there, it's in Sumner.
Right.
And it's like an acre of furniture.
Right.
Literally.
Yep.
They're having a big sale, and they
course.
don't want to miss out.
No.
But it's not, their house hasn't closed yet.
Yeah. So here's the thing. If you're buying, I'm gonna speak directly to you now. If you are buying a piece of property and you are relying on a mortgage, freeze your financial life for the next 30 days until you close on this property. Freeze it, because not only are they going to run your credit, but what they're going to do after you sign all your documents and all the documents go back to the lender's going to run your credit one more time. They may even verify that you're still employed before they write the check and sign off on your loan. So if you open any new accounts, that's going to red flag the lender. And the underwriter that works for the lender is going to get very nervous about that. And if you're close, if you're on those margin lines, it may be enough to knock you out of that loan at the
Right.
last minute. So when it comes to buying furniture, especially at the old Cannery in Sumner,
Which we love.
which we love, here's the
I
best
do
advice
actually
I can
really
ever
love
give
that
you.
place.
Don't even drive by the old cannery. Don't get out of your car. Don't open the door. Don't step in the parking lot. Don't think, well, they've got fudge in there.
They
Maybe
do
we should
have
go
fu-
inside.
they do
Don't
have
do
fudge.
this. In fact, I'll go one step further. Don't drive to Sumner. Don't drive to the town that the cannery is in.
Because it'll
Stay
suck
away.
you right in.
Stay away. Don't watch television ads all about furniture, because your reticulating activator is
Right.
going to be up, right? Or whatever that thing's
So
called.
that's the thing. If you buy a VW Bug, then you notice all the VW
Then you know,
bugs.
exactly. So you're going to notice nothing but furniture ads. You're going to get the little stuff in your mailbox. Oh, the cannery's having a sale. Throw it away. Get rid of it. Do not do this. Wait till it closes and then knock your socks off. So anyway, like what just happened, don't let the lights go out on your transaction.
We had
okay?
a little lighting issue.
Yeah,
but we're
don't-
just going to roll
Don't
with
let
it.
it happen. Just
Yeah.
stay away from anything that you're going to open a new account on or rack up your credit card statements on. Be conservative. Freeze your financial life until it closes, then go after it.
All right. We hope you guys got something out of this. It's a little something for everybody, for buyers, for sellers, and for agents, especially, right?
Yeah, and we'll probably have more of them in a few weeks. You never know. Things just keep happening. So hope you had a good time. We hope you learned from some of these things. If you're like, I think I might be getting into that situation now, get out in front of it. Manage expectations. Remember, communicate.
You can always give us a call. I mean, we're here. Call us if you have any questions. We're happy to answer them, whether you're with another brokerage or not.
Yeah, you're probably, if you're watching this, you're probably in our friends network anyway, and you probably know who we are and how to get hold of us anyway.
Yeah.
So love to help.
All right. Have a great one.
See ya.